Hi everybody, I'm Dr. Christine Simmonds-Moore and I'm going to be talking to you today about some recent research, or ongoing research I should say, that's going on at the University of West Georgia that is exploring the correlates and nature of anomalous interactions with objects, otherwise known as psychometry. So psychometry is defined as a process whereby facts or impressions about a person or thing are received through contact with an object associated with the subject of the impressions. Rings, photographs, and similar tokens are often used. A degree of lowered consciousness, that is, a state sometimes approaching trance, is thought to improve psychometric readings. So this is the experience whereby information is therefore connected with physical objects, and I find that to be very fascinating. This relates to some place or object-related haunting experiences. For example, Meyer and Hansen did some research that was reported in 1992, whereby their investigation of a haunting included a psychometric reading as part of it. It is something that may be the same as hauntings if we think about the fact that some hauntings are about place and even object-related information. So it's very, very interesting and relevant to both ESP and also to haunting type phenomena. What is going on then in terms of psychometry? Well, it could be that psychometry is really the same thing as ESP, or it might be something a bit more complicated, but it's a very interesting form of ESP because it does seem to be very much tied to a particular object or location. Rogo discussed psychometry back in 1974 and discussed how some people have thought that it might be that the information is actually directly entangled with the object itself. And so when a psychic or sensitive interacts with the object, they are reading the information directly from the object itself. So this is associated with pagan Stecher. Alternatively, it might be that the object does not hold the information, but in a sense serves as a symbol or a catalyst, whereby the sensitive can connect to the person, but it's not directly holding the information itself. Rogo at the time considered that Roll's psi fields might be a more parsimonious explanation that would incorporate both of these things, so ESP and a more sort of physically based understanding. Other explanations could be Roll's more recent idea of the long body. So the long body assumes that there is an extension of the body into space and time, essentially that there are meaningful interactions between a person and the physical environment and the people and places that are meaningful to them. So my own long body might extend to my village in the UK and to my family who are physically related to me, physically connected to me, and emotionally connected to me. This can also translate to objects that have meaning to me. So for example, we talked about rings. My ring, I wear my ring on my finger, and my ring and I are meaningfully connected. There may well be something about my information that is connected to my ring because it's been in close proximity with me and it has meaning. We also have to think about the idea of place memories as well. So H.H. Price talked about place memories, and more recently, Heath has taken this up and discussed them as a two-way process. So in a sense, place memories refer to the idea that sometimes information about a person could be connected with a particular location. And traditionally, this might be more about information that is emotional. So traumatic information or emotional information might be more likely to connect to certain physical substrates. Heath's idea is that there are two parts of this. So there's information that is connecting with the object, and then there's also the sensitive, the person who is experiencing the information that is interacting with the information that is tied to the object in a sense. So here we've got the idea that emotion is playing a key role. We also have the idea of the survival hypothesis. So here, the person who is the sensitive is actually interacting with information that indicates that, in a sense, there is continuation of consciousness of a discarnate person. So those are all the different possibilities. We'll look at the research now. And there is a very limited amount of research, although it has been studied quite a lot throughout the history of parapsychology, but needs to be revisited because most of the research was really taking place in the early part of the 20th century, with only a couple of studies that have happened in more recent years. So early studies mostly focused on the experiences and performance of self-claimed sensitives or mediums, oftentimes mediums. So this seems to be something that is happening in the context of survival. So mediums are picking up objects and accessing information about the deceased. So that's interesting in and of itself. So a lot of that early work was focused on sensitives or mediums and their abilities to have access to information that might be connected with objects. So there's a few studies that we've cited up here. We mentioned Pagan Stecker just now. His research was interesting. He focused on the experiences of a Mexican medium, Senora Z, who he noted was able to visualize certain scenes that were connected with the object in contact with her fingertips. So she would actually be physically touching the object and then the information would come. He noted that she was seemingly in a trance-like state of awareness whilst this was going on, which I find fascinating too. And he felt that the information that was associated with the object was in two forms. So there was information that was a more mechanical form of information that seemed to be due to the surroundings. And the second form was a more psychical form, which seemed to be less powerful than the information that was directly received in the actual environment. So that's an interesting line of thought. So again, remember that he was somebody who felt that there might be information actually connected to the objects themselves. Another interesting study was done by Lawrence Lashan, and he worked with Eileen Garrett. So some of these studies are just focusing on one person and their abilities, and the studies are written up to demonstrate that the medium or psychic is able to do what they're claiming to do, and this is no exception. So Eileen Garrett was able to accurately access information that was connected with certain objects. More recent studies have started to look at psychometry experiences and performance amongst members of the general public. So one example is Baker et al. Study in 2017. And in this study, they used marbles to connect information from people to objects. And they tried to keep the experimenter information out of things. And they looked at performance in two groups, a group of psychics and a group of non-special claimants, so basically people who are just members of the public. Interestingly, this study found better performance in members of the general public, which I find fascinating. There's very little work that's systematically tried to unpack what might correlate with this kind of experience. And then on the other hand, performance at a psi task that is a psychometry-based psi task. One study by Hearn did find that mediums, including those who had psychometric experiences, tended to be self-sufficient, undisciplined, and affected by feelings. So we're looking again at the idea of emotion. In general, little research has explored personality and correlational factors. And so our study sought to really unpack various correlates. And we started off by thinking about anomaly-proneness and which aspects of anomaly-proneness might be best aligned with psychometry. So anomaly-prone personalities tend to be those who have more exceptional experiences. And it seems like that tendency to have experiences might be connected to the way that their systems are set up. So people who are more prone to anomalous experiences tend to have more interconnected nervous systems and minds to bodies. They're much more connected with themselves. They're also more likely to think in a more fluid way. There's more fluid connections, more plasticity within the system. There's more movement of information across boundaries, so from the body to the mind, unconscious to conscious, but also between the person and the environment. So awareness of environmental information or social information is also part of this. So there's a general tendency to be sensitive and permeable, and also to exist in more liminal states of consciousness, so be more likely to shift rapidly into mild altered states of consciousness, which is interesting when we see that psychometry does seem to be associated with a trance-like altered state of consciousness. Synesthesia is an important variable for understanding a range of exceptional experiences, and so we wanted to look at how this related to psychometry. Essentially, synesthesia refers to something that happens when an inducing stimulus results in the usual response plus an additional concurrent response. So concurrent responses can occur in various manners. They can include information that is in the mind's eye, or information that seems like it's projected out in space. So if we're talking about a color for numbers, an associational concurrent would be that I know that the number 5 is red, or I see red in my mind's eye. A projected color for numbers would be that I see red floating around actually on the letter or the number, as a sort of extra way of perceiving, I suppose. Synesthesia is very much connected with exceptional experiences. So we found that it related to more anomalous experiences and parapsychological phenomena in our 2020 study. We didn't find any differences between synesthetes and controls in a precognition task, but we did find that associators were better than projectors on the precognition task. We found interesting evidence that synesthetes are having a concurrent experience for something unseen in our psychometry study. So we found that the experience of an apparition taking up space correlated with geomagnetism, but only in synesthetes, which I find fascinating. Also in the same study, we found that there was a correlation between the extent to which an apparition was felt to take up space and the output of a random number generator, only among synesthetes again. So it could be that there are anomalous interactions with space and potentially objects among synesthetes. So essentially, we're looking at the idea that some exceptional experiences may be complicated synesthesias. And there is evidence that synesthesias can occur for unconscious information. Our focus here is on information that might be connected with objects. And so if you look at a ring that was owned by another person, you can't see the emotional or personality related information or life information overtly, but it may be that there is some information connected with that object that could be perceived if one is a synesthete, perhaps. So inducing stimuli could include emotions, personality, in the context of psychometry or ESP. It could include other factors too in other exceptional experiences outside of psychometry. And our research has suggested, again, that there might be more anomalous interactions with the environment amongst synesthetes, and we wondered whether that might translate to interaction with objects that might be holding information or connected with or correlated with information, i.e. psychometry. Another key focus of this current research is something new for parapsychology. And so we are quite excited about introducing this variable to you. You may have heard of it before, you may have experienced this. ASMR is Autonomous Sensory Meridian Response, aka head tingles. It's the experience of tingling sensations in the crown of the head in response to a range of audio-visual triggers, such as whispering, tapping, and hand movements. So it is a response that is a body-based response. And I think it seems quite interesting as an anomaly-prone variable because it correlates with synesthesia, which we've just discussed as being an interesting variable for anomalous experiences and paranormal experiences. It correlates with openness to experience that's been found to correlate with ESP in the context of the Ganzfeld. It correlates with increased scoring on transliminality, body consciousness, and unusual experiences. Now, all of these could be relevant to the psi hypothesis or tendencies to have anomalous experiences. And interestingly as well, there seem to be higher scores on empathy. And so this is interesting for psychometry, I think. So we're talking about whether somebody might have more of a tendency to be empathic and feel those responses in the body, and whether that might relate to psychometry. So in summary, we think that ASMR is synesthesia-like. There's lots of evidence that it's some kind of synesthesia, perhaps, and it does seem to relate to responses to emotional and social information, certainly interpersonal information. So we wondered whether this might translate to interactions with emotional and social information that is connected with objects, i.e. psychometry. So our study is looking at how ASMR correlates with psychometry. We basically made one-tail prediction for that one. How does synesthesia correlate with psychometry? Again, a one-tail prediction. How does synesthesia and ASMR relate to one another? One-tailed, we think they'll relate positively. How does ASMR correlate with exceptional experiences? We felt that it would correlate positively with exceptional experiences. How does ASMR correlate with exceptional experiences generally in those given a paranormal attribution? So you've got repetition there. How does synesthesia correlate with exceptional experiences generally in those given a paranormal attribution? And we also were looking to explore experiences more qualitatively. So we did a mixed method study using Qualtrics. There was a demographic section asking about various aspects of the person, personality, handedness, age, gender, ethnicity, I believe. We asked one general question about synesthesia. We used the ASMR 15, which was designed by Roberts et al. In 2019, as a measure for ASMR. And we used the Survey of Anomalous Experiences by Owen et al. As a measure of exceptional experiences. And we use this one because it allows us to ascertain tendencies to have experiences and tendencies to have experiences that are attributed paranormally as a sort of separate variable. We included one yes/no question about whether people had experienced psychometry. And then if people answered yes, we prompted them to open up and describe what that experience was like so that we could engage in some qualitative research on that. On the slide here, I've also got mention of future size studies that we are planning to do. So we are partway through some of this. So we have 5 target persons who are ring bearers. Again, a nice reference to Lord of the Rings. The ring bearers are going to, or have been wearing the rings for a 4-week period. The rings will be matched with identical control rings and use as targets in object-based ESP studies that are going to be happening in the fall of 2022. We are going to be recruiting participants to take part in an online study and a face-to-face study to explore whether it's possible to select the target rings more often than the control rings. And we are expecting those who experience more ASMR to do better at that task, but that's bracketed for the future. But as I say, this is part of the study we're talking about today is part of a bigger project. So, fairly hot off the press findings, we found that those who reported psychometry did score significantly higher on ASMR than those who do not. Interesting. I'm quite excited about that. There was a small, significant positive correlation between synesthesia and psychometry. So it's not big, but it's there. Synesthetes scored significantly higher than non-synesthetes on ASMR. So there is something there. So maybe ASMR is some form of synesthesia. ASMR tendencies correlated positively and significantly with proneness to having exceptional experiences, regardless of attribution, and to a slightly lesser extent to exceptional experiences given a paranormal attribution. I believe I've missed something off the slide. So I think that synesthesia did also correlate positively and significantly as well. Experience proneness and paranormal experiences correlated positively and significantly with one another. So I mentioned that we were also doing some qualitative work. So we've got 5 main themes here. So the first one is context and schema. So there seemed to be some kind of background that's driving the experience, sort of an organizing framework, I suppose. So psychometry appears to happen as a result of intention or spontaneously in association with objects or the physical locations or spaces. So the person knows that the object is associated with the deceased. or they are old. So that is there as part of the recipe. Secondly, we've got the idea that, sorry, I'm just going to move my slide up. Yeah, a flash. So there's a passive and transient imagery that occurs in different sensory modalities. The imagery may be vividly noted and seems to occur in close temporal proximity to viewing the object or entering a physical space. So our experiences were hauntings and objects when we asked people about anomalous interactions with objects. So I thought that was quite interesting. Lived feelings and intense emotions. There was like a sudden emotional experience in association with given objects. Emotions are intensely experienced and can co-occur with mental imagery. This can happen in the body or in the environment. This can include the feeling of a presence. So that does, again, align with more classical ideas of hauntings. Noesis, direct knowledge and information. So information from an external source is suddenly or directly received or cognized by the participant. The information is sometimes understood to have accuracy or be corroborated. So that's kind of there as part of the story too. Finally, there is an empathic theme. So perspective taking, connection, and empathy emerged as a theme. Excuse me. So there was some kind of connection or empathic feeling with the former owner of the object, and a sense that the person who is the sensitive or who is encountering the information is experiencing another person's perspective via empathy. So those kind of terms were used in the descriptions. So I find this really, really fascinating. Again, this is neutral in terms of whether the psychometry experiences that are being described are genuine, but this is experiences indicative of everyday people's encounters with psychometry. Thank you for your attention. If you would like to email me about anything that we've talked about today, my email address is on the slide. It's csimmond@westga.edu. I'd like to thank members of the EERL, the Exceptional Experience Research Lab, particularly Rachel Joseph, who's now graduated, and Tabitha Smith for their work on the project. They've been wonderful undergraduate research assistants. I want to thank the BL Foundation for funding some of the projects that I discussed in the background to this paper. And I also want to thank the John B. Yorkheim Memorial Foundation for their support of some aspects of the psychometry project, particularly what's happening next. Thank you very much. And now I'm open to answering questions. Thank you.